Hi everybody, welcome back to Mando Lessons. My name's Baron Collins Hill. In this week's lesson, we're going to put the mandolin aside and we're going to be thinking about improvisation. Improvisation is a very mystical and personal journey that everyone has to go through, and there's a lot of variables involved, and I've spent a lot of my life improvising in a number of different scenarios, whether it's jazz or free open improvisation or improvising with fiddle tunes, all sorts of different things. And I'm by no means a master, but I have thought a lot about it, and especially recently it's been kind of rolling around in my head of like, what are the variables of improvisation, and how can I boil down what improvisation is into really tangible ideas and skills for myself. So also I figured I'd bring you all along on this journey. I feel like there are two totally valid sort of schools of improvisation. One is very music theory based, where you need to know your chords and your scales and your scale degrees, arpeggios, patterns, chord structures, harmony, all this sort of music theory and technical information kind of up in your head and be able to express it out of the instrument. And there's also the side of improvisation that is very, again, personal. It's very sort of like feeling what it is that you want to express and having that come out through your instrument. They're very different approaches. I think they're both important and both valid. So I'm going to sort of try to talk a little bit about both in order to sort of create a broad spectrum of what improvisation can be. One of the first steps in learning to improvise, I think, is going to be listening. You need to know sort of what the end goal is, what you like to hear in improvisation, because everybody does it a little different. There's so many styles. Are you going to be soloing in a jazz context or open improvisation or fiddle tunes? I'm going to be focusing on fiddle tunes because that's the focus of my website. But you can take any of sort of the talking points that I'm going over here and applying them to whatever sort of improvisation interests you most. So for a lot of people, listening is going to be the first step. Maybe you don't even play an instrument yet, but a sort of style of music or a particular instrument catches your ear, and you say, wow, I would like to be able to do that. And I think an important thing to do at that point is really just spend a lot of time listening to music. I mean, listening to music is one of my favorite things to do, regardless of the style, just learning more. And you can follow little threads of, oh, I heard Chris Thile, speaking for myself, I heard Chris Thile play the mandolin, and it's like, I don't even know what that instrument is. And I knew it wasn't a guitar, I knew it wasn't a fiddle, and then learned it was a mandolin, found his band Nickel Creek, and then started exploring what other groups Chris Thile was in, other artists he played with. Learned about Mike Marshall and Sam Bush, and then went back in time to Bill Monroe and early mandolin pioneers. And there's so many sort of little rabbit holes you can go down to really kind of do a lot of kind of critical listening, hearing what it is you like to hear and what you'd like to be able to do on the instrument. All that time that you spend listening is going to really benefit you when it comes time to put fingers down on an instrument and make some sound. Because if you've listened to jazz all your life and then you try to play a fiddle tune, it's probably going to come out kind of jazzy. If you play fiddle tunes all your life and only ever listen to fiddle music, and then you say, oh, I'd really like to do some open improvisation, and you haven't done much listening to that, it might be a difficult transition to make. While I'm not saying in the least that you should only have one style of music that you like to play or listen to, I think defining some goals, especially if you're new to improvisation, can be really helpful. Really narrow down what it is you'd like to be able to do a lot of listening, and try to kind of make a list, even if you're a list maker like myself, of what it is you like to hear, specific tracks, specific artists, specific little lines in solos, like, oh, that really speaks to me. And the more of that sort of work you can do is going to be really beneficial in the long run. Once you've done a lot of listening, it's time to, get your fingers down on an instrument and start that learning process. One of the major sort of themes of improvisation is that you're going to need to have to improvise over something most of the time, unless you're into more kind of open forms of music, which are also equally great. So with fiddle tunes, you're going to have that bass fiddle tune, and then you're going to improvise over that by changing the melody, varying different aspects of the tune. If you're playing jazz, you have similarly like the head, and then there's more sort of exploratory improvisation in the middle. Maybe you come back to the head at the end. All these different ways of improvising often will have some sort of guiding factors. Most of the time it's going to be maybe a melody or a groove. Figure out what it is that you're improvising on is going to be a really important aspect. Through listening more closely to the form of the music you're interested in, you can really start to narrow down. You'll start to hear things like with fiddle tunes, there's AABB forms that you'll hear over and over again. You'll hear sort of what is and what isn't idiomatic within the style of music that you're playing and how people improvise, to really kind of start to hone your ears in on what's, for lack of a better word, allowed and what's not, or what's common to hear anyway, in improvisations of your particular kind of music that you're interested in. The third aspect of improvisation is going to be just the technical ability to sort of create the sounds that you hear. A lot of this is covered on my website, mandolessons.com. I have a beginner series where I go over everything from learning how to hold the instrument to create good tone. I have an entire section of my website called Technique and Fundamentals, and that's got how to create different ornaments and various techniques on the instrument to sort of find different sounds and access different parts of the instrument so you can really express yourself when it comes time to improvise. Another important factor in learning to improvise is having some idea of theory. Now, theory can often scare people away, needing to know classical theory and, how do you build a chord, how do you make a scale, all of this stuff. It's a lot of sort of science and math. And that is certainly something that can be helpful when it comes to improvise, but there's also a certain level of kind of folk theory that you can sort of attain, not necessarily through pencil and paper, kind of working things out on a scientific and mathematical level, but I think there's something in the way of theory. If you don't know sort of the mathematical theory, but you're able to create those sounds on your instrument and have a sharp ear, that gives you sort of some physical theory, whether it's muscle memory or just like an innate sense of kind of where to find a note on the instrument. I would count that as theory in sort of the way that I'm thinking about improvisation. So don't get scared off thinking you need to know a lot of kind of mechanical music theory in order to improvise. That's not at all the case. There's been many, many improvisers over the years, some of the greats, that don't have sort of the classical music theory that a lot of people think of. That said, along with the muscle memory and the listening side of theory and finding notes on your instrument, it can be really helpful to have a couple basic classical music theory ideas in your practice regime that will really help you build up some really concrete skills and kind of give you a palette of kind of sounds and colors to work with in order to express yourself through improvisation. Now, what aspects of music theory you're going to need to know in order to kind of express yourself on your particular instrument in your particular style of music that you're interested in playing is going to vary from instrument to instrument and style to style. I think there are a couple really kind of universal ones. There's scales, just your classic do, re, mi. If you play a chordal instrument like a mandolin, maybe knowing some chords, things like that. I think an important thing regardless is that when you're thinking about music theory, it's really important to physically connect it to your instrument. I spent a lot of time in college in a music theory class learning kind of classical music theory, and then I would go back to my room and I would play mandolin and play fiddle tunes with no connection of kind of the music theory I was learning in class to the instrument, and that really kind of kept me from accessing any of that music theory that I was learning in class and sort of having any actual use for it, because I don't play classical piano, and I was just playing kind of folk music. But once I started to put the pieces together and figure out what was needed for me to play the kind of music I was playing on mandolin and how to improvise and how to better communicate, which I think is one of the greatest aspects of music theory, is it gives you a language to communicate with other musicians. Once I got all of that sort of starting to trickle into the physical ability of playing the mandolin and mapping out the fretboard, that's when things really started to click for me. So whenever you're working on theory, I would highly recommend to have an instrument in your hands, be creating those sounds as you're thinking, and that will really benefit your playing. Last up is to put the pick to the strings in the case of the mandolin and actually start improvising. Some people call it instantaneous or spontaneous composition. It's, making up that music on the fly and really sort of starting to make sounds and explore the instrument in a way that isn't written down. It's something that you've never done before, and you're really just sort of taking the instrument for a walk, is how some people refer to it. By understanding the variables I've been talking about, like theory, technique, repertoire, and listening, you can really start to access some of the more kind of hard to speak about aspects of improvisation, like playing with feeling and being conversational as you play. And that can really, come from having an idea of what improvisation is in the style of music you're playing and how to access that through all of those variables I was talking about. That's enough talking for one video, but this is going to be a whole series on improvisation. We're going to get hands-on and we're going to work through some of these skills and some of these variables and really help you figure out how to improvise in your own style on your own instrument. I hope you'll join me for the ride. It's great thinking about this stuff for myself, and I hope you have fun listening and working on this yourself. If you want more hands-on lessons, check out mandolessons.com. It's my website where I have lots of mostly fiddle tunes and a lot of folk music, but also a beginner series on how to play the mandolin, lots of techniques and fundamentals and things like that. All my lessons are always free. I put out a new lesson every single week. There are a couple ways to donate, which is greatly appreciated. You can find all those links in the description. I've also got a Patreon page where you get access to lessons early and also have access to patron-only live streams, which are always a lot of fun. In any case, it's not required, but greatly appreciated if you're looking to support what I do. Thanks so much for watching. Hope you have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.